We're Greg and Leah, the host of Evolve, the #1 podcast about relationships, and not just the tender or toxic romantic ones, but all kinds of relationships with many people, places, and paths.
And we aren't here because we know or understand it all, simply because we are working to evolve and asking others to join the evolution.
So join us in this next episode of Evolve.
Welcome to another episode of Evolve. We're really excited today. We get to have Samantha Hart, owner of Yoga Home, which is a yoga practice based in Colorado Springs. And I think we're going to kind of maybe, and again, we can morph off, like as we've said before, like we're going to talk about one of the relationships that she has really based in, obviously, yoga. But this is something new that we've never talked about. And I love that you're bringing this topic as yoga as a way to transform your relationship with your kids. I have no idea where that's going to go. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
I've
and
got kind of questions on that.
Oh, yeah. But she might answer the questions as we go. So
welcome.
yeah, thank you for coming here and being on Evolve. First, let me ask you, what made you want to come on Evolve?
So I think I told you it was just a moment of like, hey, I could do that. You had asked, if there was some sort of transformation, story that you had that you could share, and I was like, that's so outside of my comfort zone. I'm really
Which
good
I
with,
love.
Yeah. And sometimes I'm like, I get like this sensation of like, do it, and sometimes I end up sending the message before I actually think about it, which I always love because when
I'm not the only one who does that.
Yeah.
That like you hit send and you're like, oh damn it!
Exactly.
I should have thought about that.
And that was the thing, because it's so outside of my comfort zone that as soon as I hit send, I was like, oh shit, what did I do?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I knew that like before that moment, I knew that I needed to send the message because I think that it's important to step outside of your comfort zone.
Absolutely.
And also, I love my kids and I love my journey, and sometimes people find it fascinating, sometimes people don't, and that's okay too. But and so I thought I would share, and if anybody got anything out of it, I think it's beneficial either way.
And that's the thing, like I'm very much an advocate of, even if one person hears something and it impacts and inspires them, that's plenty.
Exactly.
And if I hear it myself, I feel like just getting this out sometimes.
Yeah.
Just, even though it's
Oh, I see what you're saying. Hearing yourself.
hearing yourself, or like,
Yeah.
I mean, we've gained so much healing from just
Doing the podcast.
doing the podcast. Just hitting that play button and then letting it rip or the record button. and I remember the first time we did it, it was like, I was so fucking nervous.
Oh yeah. I can't believe he said yes, but we have a whole podcast about how that went down. But, because he's pretty shy, like I was just telling you before.
I've done it before, I don't want to.
So that's in my comfort zone. But like I think I might have said to you last time when we did our meet and greet, like that I heard someone say that the only way to grow is in the unfamiliar.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's so uncomfortable and so awkward and so like depending on your personality, it can be very intensely uncomfortable. So when you said that, so what a great segue.
Everybody has a story, and I feel like everybody has also the right to have their story heard. And the more that we can understand that our stories aren't really that different. Like, I mean, of course, there's like things that show up that are individual, but we really do have a lot more in common. And the more that we can hear stories of other people, the more maybe we don't feel so alone in our own existence. Especially when it comes to things that we don't like to talk about.
Right.
Like the whole idea about how yoga has changed my relationship as a mother and my relationship with my kids and my husband. People don't want to talk about how they were borderline abusive to their kids when they were little. People don't want to admit that they didn't have self-control and could have ended up, in prison for
losing everything.
For losing it and losing it on children, like these little tiny beings that have no power in the relationship, and there's a vulnerability in being honest about it. And I always find it interesting because when I tell people like, no, I mean, I hated my kids when they were little, and I don't mean that there wasn't a part of me that didn't love them. There was always love, but I hated being a mom, and I took it out on them and I blamed them for it, which was not okay. But if I can admit that, then hopefully the other women out there that don't feel like a great mom can also sit with, okay, there's ways to fix this and change this and to feel better about this situation.
And I love that you're saying this because I don't know if you ever saw the movie What to Expect When You're Expecting. Oh my God. And it's just like, it's kind of like today's day and age where everything on Instagram is just so put together and perfect.
Yes.
And all these moms are,
Right.
making bread from scratch and doing these things and just loving motherhood.
Uh-huh.
But in that movie, What to Expecting, there's this part where she just has a meltdown on stage.
Yeah.
But she ends up more relatable to all the moms who are pregnant and struggling than the woman who was like all put together.
Exactly.
And it's very, very true. For whatever reason, we're very drawn to like the fake and the fat, like, filter.
And the perfect, yeah.
And the perfect.
Yeah.
And then we're constantly comparing. But like what really resonates is someone saying these truths.
And the thing with the yoga world is the yoga world has a tendency to be really fake too. Like the yoga world wants to love and light everything away. And if I just stay in my divinity, then I don't have to admit that life happens. But there's a whole bypassing of humanity that happens when we do that. And then we don't give people the opportunity to actually be human. And so then we're striving to be this perfect, if I have emotions, then obviously I'm a horrible human, right? And that's just not how it works. Yoga is all about embracing the humanity, even the parts that we don't necessarily love about ourselves. Yoga says is still perfect.
Right.
It's all by divine design. And so, living in shame and guilt doesn't make any sense either.
Yeah. No, and that's what, I don't know if we watched My Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. Was that the name of that series?
Yeah.
And like there's a whole yoga scene in that where it's like this all these perfect positions.
Yeah.
And Rachel, the main character, is just like, oh my God, I'm not going to fit this at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah,
And I mean, the
exactly.
yoga instructor is beautiful and like so put together and just so fit. And
It's funny.
I
when
mean-
you actually go to, that's what you see on TV.
Yeah.
no, some yoga classes
Well,
are like that
yeah.
too.
I guess some high-end ones or something, but the yoga classes that I've go to, I remember
We've
the
had a
first
lot of
time,
fun.
Your expectation the very first time
Yeah.
is that is going to be, and you know what your body looks like. You've seen it naked.
And you're pretty sure that if you do this move, you're gonna fart.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm gonna fart in this class.
You go in and like, oh shit, I didn't take my shoes off. Oh no, now I gotta take my shoes off.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Like, are you gonna offend anyone with something you don't know that you're supposed to do?
But we go to the low end ones. We've been to the library ones.
The low end? Why do you say that? They've
Well, we're
been
not paying
great.
money to go into.
Oh, we've had so much fun at them, though.
I think the one in this particular at the Sunwater Spa here, we do pay money for that, but that's
Oh, yeah, we love
the
that too.
variety of people. Well, it's Manitou anyway, so
Yeah.
you have that going for you. But the variety, it's so comforting to know that you're not the only one in the room that's self-conscious or.
Yeah, no.
And it helps when the instructor, I don't know how your class is because we haven't been to anything yet, but like when the instructor puts you at ease, like, hey, you don't have to be this, you don't have to be this, this is
Right.
what this is about. So,
Well,
tell us some more.
It's a catch-22 being a little bit heavier, like on the weight side, especially as a yoga owner, a yoga studio owner, because there is this idea that like yoga has to be, like we have the Western idea of it has made it such a fitness thing. Right. And it's not necessarily about that, but I do constantly come up against like, younger people come into class and then judging me, like I don't know what I'm talking about because I carry extra weight, which I've been studying yoga for 20 years. I know a smidge.
Something.
Just a smidge. But I've been studying very, very hard for 20 years, and this is my passion. Kind of going back a little bit to the whole kid thing. I also study Jyotisha, which is Vedic astrology. It's the astrology according to India. So it's a little bit different than the West. But in my astrology chart, it basically says that I have the opportunity to be an abusive mother, or I would study something foreign. And studying yoga, I like to tell everybody that studying yoga was the first selfless thing I've ever done, because I didn't like yoga when I started yoga. I still don't necessarily love yogasana.
Who does?
I know, right?
There's some really hard
Let's
things.
be real. Oh my gosh. So going
It's like,
back
who loves exercising right at first?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we're done.
Never before and during.
I read a yoga journal article one time, and this lady was like, oh my god, I went to this class and this yoga teacher kept talking about how this sucked and that sucked and this and I was just so off-putting, and I was like, oh, poor thing, she took my class, like, but I'm not unrealistic, like, my ass is on fire right now, and this is painful, and like, not painful, but like, interesting, and so
Uncomfortably,
let's call it what it is and stop pretending that this always feels good, because it doesn't have to always feel good. And so anyway, so the astrology chart basically said I was either going to study something foreign or I could be an abusive mom. And I started studying yoga when we had moved to Grand Junction. My husband got promoted and we moved to Grand Junction. And I really started studying yoga. I did it a little bit before that, but really that was like my way of trying to I don't know, find world peace. I didn't get into yoga because I liked yoga. I got into yoga because I threw out my back doing Pilates and I wanted to have some sort of movement. I was a stay-at-home mom with 2 young kids and I didn't know anybody. I didn't have any friends. I didn't know the city. We had 1 car. Well, I don't think that's true. I think we had 2 cars. But anyway, I didn't go anywhere and I was depressed and miserable.
Yeah.
So I started Pilates and I threw out my back in Pilates because if you don't know what you're doing, then that's not good to do.
I've never done that, but it looks crazy intense. It's like total gym with a bunch of gymnastics.
Yeah.
So put those 2 together.
Yeah. And so I started to do yoga and within just a little bit of time, my back was healed and it wasn't a big issue anymore. And I didn't like yoga. But what I did notice about practicing yoga is when I was done with my practice, the rest of the day, all of a sudden, I wasn't yelling at my kids all day long. These poor little 4 and 2-year-olds that are just, trying to survive. That's their whole purpose, right? Yeah. Trying to survive and wanting to be loved. And I realized that I wasn't yelling at them anymore. And that was, I still remember it to the day. I had a whole journal that I started journaling about yoga and I remember just being I don't know what it is about this that makes me a better mom, but I'm going to stick with it because of that. And so it kind of was the first selfless thing that I have ever done in my life, I think. And here we are. I started practicing yoga. My kiddo was 2, so they're 24, so about 22 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
But then, so you practiced yoga for 2 years before you started studying yoga then?
No, well...
Would you say that?
No, I mean, as soon as I started practicing yoga and started feeling the benefits, I started studying it.
Okay.
But what actually got me into yoga was I've always had an obsession with India. And
me too.
Yeah, I didn't realize yoga was a thing, but I've always loved India. And so when I was a teenager, especially in my later teens, I practiced henna and oh my gosh, I wore bindis, total cultural appropriation at this point. But I loved the culture. I would spend a lot of time at the Tibet stores and was really into the deities and so when I found yoga was a thing after I threw out my back, I was like, oh my god, divine intervention.
I just don't like the curry.
You don't like the curry?
The smell.
Yeah. He hates curry.
A lot of spices, but
yeah, but I do like all the culture part.
Yeah.
Like the food.
Well, that's how we started Ayurvedic medicine kind of. I don't even know how we ended up. Our story has just got so many. Just everything kind of came in at one time when we took off our belief, our more narrow-minded religious beliefs. Everything just started coming in at fast and hard, and we just were that's new. Let's look at this. Let's talk about this. So Ayurvedic is what kind of led me into that. That's why I'm saying maybe not that many years ago, but not that long ago either, that we kind of dove into some of that ourselves. And that's when we did, what is our dosha and which, going in that direction. But I love the fact that you talked about the birth chart and astrology being different. So I want to come back to that again around at some point, even if it's not on this podcast, remind me. I want to talk to you about that more. But yeah, keep going about so 22 years ago, you started diving in. Do you know now what was helping you be a better parent through yoga?
So, yoga obviously gives space, right? It starts to create space between the experience and the experiencer. At first, energetically too, when we think about the energetic body, it's working through the marma points and the nadis in different ways, and so moving energy a little bit differently. But even just taking a moment for myself to just reflect on who I wanted to be, I think was a really important thing. And then studying it. So yogasana can do some amazing things. And I did, it does help you calm down if you're, a hothead like I was. But it was more of the idea of that, the more that I studied yoga, the more that it was you're perfect. You're perfect. You're perfect. And so I started to be well, even in Ayurveda, right? With the different doshas and stuff like that, your body is meant to be yours, an individual, and it's perfect. And so the more that you buy into this idea that you're perfect and that life shows up, right? The less that you have to make anything negative, and then the less you become a victim. So one of the first
I like that.
Yeah, the victim of the circumstance. So one of the first big yamas that is the first part of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras is that lands with me is Swadhyaya. This is my practice, and the practice of Kriya Yoga, but Swadhyaya, self-study. Who am I? Who am I in this situation? And when I started to think about this, like, it has a tendency to overflow, but who am I as a parent? And of course, I was raised from parents who were very strict, and it was their way or the highway, right? Like, that's just how it was. Yeah. And their parents were borderline abusive because that's just how it was. And so I thought that parenting, especially since I had my first kid so young, I'm a young mom. I had my kid when I was 16. And I didn't have any parenting skills to begin with. Yeah. So the only thing that I knew to mimic was my way or the highway. Whether this kid was 6 months old or 18, right? And so I started my journey as a mother being like, what I say goes. And when I can't emotionally regulate my, it's the kid's fault. Yeah. You're making me mad. Yes, you're not listening to me. You're being disrespectful. This is your fault, not my fault for not being able to understand. To regulate and to understand that, kids only know what kids know, right? Mm-hmm. Like, they come into this world knowing nothing, and we teach them everything. So to have an expectation that this 2-year-old is going to listen to you without throwing a hissy fit just doesn't make any sense, because they're also just learning how to have emotions.
And they're also looking to us of how to regulate those emotions or mirror. Exactly. Like I was sharing that yesterday on our podcast with our other guests about that we come in, like you said, a blank slate, like not knowing anything, and we absorb, like, those first 7 years, we're just straight up sponges. Right. So, but I don't know how to respond and reply or react unless you show me how. Right. And so if you're, like you said, dysregulated, then it's just, they're just going to keep having that. And I've heard a lot of parents say that, like, oh, my kid just can't seem to settle down. And then when you watch the parent, you kind of see, like, you're not settled
down. Right. Yeah. And then also too, they will start to create certain patterns to pacify you. Like my son, my oldest son, my oldest son that I had when I was 16, like, he carries stress in a certain way because he was afraid of getting his butt spanked. And he learned how to, like, settle down or be quiet when mom is dysregulated. And so now he has a tendency that when, there's an argument or if there's some sort of miscommunication or whatever, there's a withdrawal with him because he was taught that he wasn't allowed to have a voice, right? And so obviously this is all stuff that we're still working on in relationship, but you can see my dysregulation and how it's affected my kids now that they're all grown.
Yeah, yeah. And what would you say, where did you start to see, or are you still, you kind of said it, we're still working on that. Like, where did you see the biggest transition in all of this? Yeah,
so it's not like I picked up a copy of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras 24 years ago and was enlightened, right? So lots of self-study and a lot of doing it wrong. And I actually had the aha moment probably when my oldest was around 12. He may have been a little bit older than that, 12, 13. And I went to this seminar and they were like, your kids are not yours. They're on loan to you. Mm-hmm. And when you have to, give up the loan, what is the relationship that you want to have with them? And I was like, holy shit, like, that was it. That was, like, the key for me. Like, if I believe that I'm perfect, whole, and complete, then I also need to believe that they're perfect, whole, and complete, and that I need to give them the space to be able to be human too. And oh Lordy, that was, like, hard, because then all of the shame and all of the guilt and all of, like, still tears, like, all of that stuff comes rushing back about how much time you wasted being a bad mom, how many ways you could have done it differently, kind of like we were talking about before. So that came back, so when he was around probably 12 or 13, that's really when I started to change how I parented. Of course, the abusive stuff, first of all, let me just clarify, I was never physically abusive, but that doesn't mean that I wasn't emotionally.
Yeah,
absolutely.
If you think about it, all of us as parents and all of our parents, in some form of another, have abused the shit out of our kids.
Yeah,
and it's not.
Sometimes it's psychological. Yeah.
It's sometimes in fact, in many cases, it's not even known that they're doing
Well, having a little being just think that they're unloved in any moment, that's abuse, right?
Yeah.
And so I totally just open about, like, I probably really was one bad, out of control moment away from probably going to prison. And yoga saved my life, and yoga saved my relationship with my kids. And I just, just to be completely honest about it. And I think that it's more common than what we, what we believe, you know? And I feel bad for moms, especially younger moms, who are expected to have kids and parent as if they know what they're doing, and because.
Yeah. So when you say yoga saved your life, define yoga first. Is it just stretching? Is it a whole sort of thing?
Yeah.
I remember the first time I was invited and dragged and told
to yoga. Did I invite you and drag you? I cannot drag this man anywhere, but sure.
There's things that she can put in front of your nose that makes you go. So you either go or you wish you had. Yeah. So I was scared to death of that. So many of our listeners may never have been to yoga. So explain that a little bit.
The West likes to do a really great job of trying to pretend that they know what yoga is, but so
that's good that you're asking if you don't know, because we don't really. We've been to classes, but we don't study
really
it.
We've been to a couple classes. We've been to several
classes for years, but that doesn't mean we know any of it. Like, so when you say certain words, I'm just
you're
like,
okay,
what's that mean?
Bring it back.
We should nod our heads.
You're like, you've been studying 20 years. I have not.
Okay. The Sangrusi of the Sarkanami.
Don't even try.
So yogasana is kind of what yoga is known for in the West. This is where we go to the classes and we do down dogs and a couple of chaturangas and eventually a nice juicy shavasana, and you go along your way, right? But yoga as a science, first of all, yoga is a science, and it's the science of studying oneself. So it's a whole philosophy. It is a whole psychology. It's theory. It's so many different ways of looking at the human experience, but it's basically studying the human experience with the goal of eventually eliminating suffering. And so I said Yoga Suturas Patanjali. That's just a text that is very popular in the United States, but there is thousands of texts on how to do yoga, or even tantra. Tantra is more of the householder way of doing it, whereas yoga was more of the sages and the priests go off into the cages. Right. Cages, not the cages, the caves.
Caves. They seclude themselves, yeah.
So it was the practice of how to eventually eliminate suffering. And so according to yoga, being incarnate and having an experience will create suffering. Whether it's a good experience or a bad experience, everything ends up being suffering.
The fact that we come out of the womb is a suffering.
Exactly.
That's our first trauma. Essentially,
So everybody has had childhood trauma. They were born.
Right. And even being madly in love will eventually cause suffering. And I like to use the example with my husband. Me and my husband are madly in love. One of us, at some point in our life, will experience the worst pain that we've ever been in, because we've chosen to be with each other and to remain madly in love. And so even the good things end up bringing suffering. So the yogis knew this, and so they were like, well, how do we get out of this cycle of suffering? How do we move beyond this? There's got to be something deeper. And so the study of yoga was how to basically regulate your nervous system, and how to regulate your emotions, and to be able to flow with how life shows up, rather than being a victim of how life shows up. And that's where taking the self-responsibility. I had to own the fact that I was a horrible mother. I had to own the fact that I was abusive. I had to own the fact that my kids and how some of the ways that they act now is because of me directly. And I had to make the change, because once you know it, and you don't make the change, you're still choosing. It's a choice now. And nobody's going to wake up and choose to be a horrible person, right? And so once you know it and it's in your face, then you have to start to make the choices. So what happened was, after all of these years of study and this aha moment and self-study, and then how it all showed up, it was I don't know, I was in the kitchen, I think at this point with my youngest, and I could tell that I was emotionally unregulated, and same patterns, nothing has changed, and I turn around and I snapped at him, and his face was just broken, and I was like, there it is, do it, change it now, say it now, right?
So before we hear Samantha's pivotal change in parenting, her moment here, I want to take a minute and ask you are you a parent feeling the challenges of connecting with your tween/teen? Do you want to create a safe space for your child to express themselves and to navigate their own journey? Well, hi, I'm Leah, whom you already know, but did you also know I am a life coach and I am dedicated to supporting families during these most pivotal years. Together, we can explore communication techniques, emotional intelligence, and tools to foster that deeper connection. My 10 Days to Connect to Your Child course is just one of the ways I love helping families thrive. And right now, you can have free access to that entire course if you DM me on any of my socials. Let's consider working together to strengthen your family bond and guide your children toward becoming confident, self-aware, amazing, unique individuals. Visit myslc.org to learn more and take the first step today. Now let's return to Samantha's huge moment.
I looked at him and I was like, hey, I'm sorry, like this, I feel some sort of way right now, like I'm having anxiety right now. This is not you, this is me. This is not you, this is me. And he was like, okay, it's okay, and walked away.
How old would you say it was?
He, at that point, my youngest was like probably about 10,
Okay.
9 or 10.
Yeah.
And that was when it was like, okay, I got this, like I can do this. And so then I started this practice of whenever I would get into that space and I'm reactive, boom, there it is. Okay, wait, this is mine. Hold on, this is mine.
Yeah.
This is mine, this is mine. And so now
I love that, saying that out, even saying that out loud, I think is so powerful. Like, this is mine.
It's so great. Like, you know, I wish I would have had the ability to do some of that work when my oldest was younger. But I didn't get into the habit of it until he was like closer to like late teens, right? And so, you know, it's been a journey and it's been a process, but my youngest will like, he now can tell when I start to get emotionally regulated, and he will just grab my hand. Like he just reaches over and he grabs my hand. So now he has like, not only can he doesn't take it on as him, but he also is like supportive.
I was just going to say supportive. Yeah, absolutely.
And so now like the whole dynamic has changed. And even my relationship with my oldest is so much better because I'm able to be like, hey, look, I will own whatever, like I am honest. I don't pretend that I was a great mom on anything, but I do let him know that he was loved because he was. And that the anger and the frustration and the feeling like a victim of being a teenage mom and, you know, having a kid and having to drop out of high school, losing all your friends, like that's hard. That's hard. Yeah. And that was mine. And I had to own that. It wasn't his. So.
Yeah, I don't know. There's so much in there that's so powerful to me. But I'm noticing a theme in everyone we're talking to lately. And the trigger point catalyst, maybe I should say catalyst instead of trigger point, but like the catalyst of their change and their growth is taking responsibility, is self-evaluation.
100%. So
like that is so huge. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Whoever wants to, listen, you can.
I was just going to say that we talked to someone yesterday, she said it this way: as soon as I got on my ship and sailed
righted my own ship,
my ship, all the other, their ships started coming on board and getting, so that
especially when you're talking parent-kid relationship.
As soon as I got my shit together, and I'm not talking about just getting your shit, but getting your shit together, knowing, taking responsibility, regulating your emotions, and building the boundaries for yourself.
Exactly. Yeah. So boundaries, the way that I teach boundaries in yoga now, I like.
You can't go right
here, don't cross it.
Don't get off the mat.
I've been in some yoga classes where you couldn't.
Oh, you can't get off it.
You're actually, there's so many people in there, but then that was when they instructed us. You don't get
off your mat. Yeah.
That's your space in life.
Like use your space. Yeah.
Stay in your lane, right? So one of the ways that I teach yoga now, I teach teachers how to show up and be teachers, but I don't just teach teachers sequences. I teach them to have a voice, right? Because yoga says that you're perfect, whole, and complete as you are, right? It doesn't say you're perfect, whole, and complete as you mimic somebody else. Right. So it's all about stepping into your authenticity. And part of the way that I do that is by talking about self-autonomy. So according to me, and the way that I see it show up in yoga, self-autonomy is...
according to me.
Yeah, according to me. Based on me. This is how I've interpreted, right, all of the study, which is probably not brand new, by the way. But self-autonomy, this idea that being in self-autonomy means that I would 100% do what is best for me in any given moment. Now, that sounds selfish. However, if I am taking care of myself and I'm eating Brussels sprouts instead of chocolate cake, or I'm moving and even though it doesn't, necessarily feel good, but I know that cardio is good for the heart. Or let's also say I take a yoga class, and instead of going into the deepest pigeon stretch that I can possibly get into where it ruins my hips, maybe I actually back off and don't push myself so hard. And instead of striving to get something out of it, sometimes just allowing it to be what shows up, right? So this idea of self-autonomy and taking care of yourself, if that happens, and then the overflow from that has to happen as well. Right? Because if I'm going to stay in my self-autonomy, it doesn't make sense for me to ask somebody else to step outside of their self-autonomy to appease me.
Right.
And this is where some of that has come into the parenting, but really with the grandbaby, right?
Yes, now a grandbaby in the picture.
Yes. So my little grandbaby is about 17 months. She's 17 months old, and she's a dick, and I love her. She's fantastic.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, right? There's this point where you're if I maintain my self-autonomy, then I cannot be a hypocrite by asking somebody else to step outside of their self-autonomy to appease me.
Even if they're an infant.
Even if they're an infant.
Even if they don't know anything.
Right. So the first thing that we taught her was how to tell us when we've overstepped boundaries if she doesn't like it. And she will wave her finger in your face and say, no. And so that's what we taught her, because I don't want to play with her because I want to play with her if she doesn't want to play with me. I don't want to give her hugs because I want to give her I want to
smother her to death,
right? Bite her cheeks and all kinds of stuff. But if she doesn't appreciate that, I want her to be able to start setting those boundaries for herself.
Wow.
And so she...
all I can think right now is I wish that would have been for me, because I'm trying to learn that at 45.
Right. I think that there's a whole... Yeah. All of us are still trying to learn how to...
if anyone would have just said I had a voice. And I would say, probably all three of us here, that no one told us you have a voice.
Right.
In your era, like you said, I don't know if you just said it now or were we talking about before, but
the parenting.
the parenting profile of the 60s and 70s and 80s was, don't be seen but not heard. And I don't, in my family, I felt like I didn't have a voice. And I shared in one of the things recently of just a memory where I feel I was 9 years old, and I was trying to help a parent, a caregiver, find something, and they were like, you don't know what you're talking about. And that's a core memory for me, that shut up, your voice doesn't matter here. And it was something so basic. I think we had said this in the beginning of the podcast here, sometimes you don't even realize you're hurting and quote unquote abusing verbally your kids or something, because you're just reactive. And the parent, the person that I'm talking about was a very reactive parent. Everything set them off. You didn't know when they would explode. So eggshells was walked on in the household. So just that feeling of your voice doesn't matter, you're too young, you're too stupid. So I'm still trying to dig out those narratives, and it's really freaking hard for me.
Because you do carry them with you.
Oh my God, yeah. And that was one comment. One comment. But I know I have other ones, but that one really hurt me with that person in that relationship of just I thought I was just helping you. I know where this is that you need, and you just shut me down. So you learn, like you said with your son, you learn how to go within and withdraw and not communicate. And we've shared this on many episodes. When we first got married, that was my go-to. You walk away. Silent treatment then becomes the next step, and cold shoulder the next step. And this was the protocol of my home. So I just love that you're trying to teach the next generation this, because I'm 45 trying to unpack this. You're
deconditioning, right? We're all deconstructing and deconditioning. And that's what, I think somebody said the first 20 years of your life you're learning how to live, and then the rest of your life you're trying to unlearn what you learned. And that's literally yoga. Yoga is the art of deconstructing. You don't have to hold on to these rigid beliefs. I was holding on so tightly that it needed to be this way with kids, because that's what I knew, and I wasn't taught any different. And then so having the ability to step out of that was challenging. But you have to let go of the rigid belief that I am in power, which is another thing that yoga will eventually ask us to do, is to give up all sense of power, because we're not powerful. Right? We're just, we pretend we're powerful. And so you have to give up power. You have to give up the desire for power. And if I give up the desire to be powerful over a small young being, then I won't be abusive, because there's no reason for it anymore. The trying to put this little kid in his place was because I felt so powerless, and now I had something I could be powerful over, and I got to take out all of my life's frustration on them.
And let me ask you this as a mom, like if you, I'm sure you've had this happen, but I felt like with my son, a lot of times, like in public especially, when I was correcting him, it was more because I was feeling judged by something, so I took it out on him, like, you're embarrassing me.
Yes, exactly.
When really it was like, I was feeling embarrassed because of his, he had a lot of energy, he climbed everything, he had a lot, like, just, maybe not as hyper as you were as a kid, according to your mom, but like, he had a lot of energy and just got into a lot. So a lot of people would say something and it would embarrass me, so I would then yell at him. And I think there was one specific moment, like, I remember thinking in my head, why am I yelling at him? It's not about him. Like, I knew it was me in that moment, but I did not like do what you did and said, you know what, this is me. This is mine. This is not you. So like, there's a lot of that shame and guilt and regret. So what would you say, like, how does someone like myself, I can't go undo all that stuff. Where do we go from here?
Like with your kids?
Like with your kids. Yeah.
First of all,
I mean, adult kids now at this point. And I know yours are adult kids. Like, where do you start?
So one of the frustrations that I have with my own mother, because we all have parents, right? One of the frustrations that I have with my own mother is that my mom has always been incapable of owning her shit. And so that frustration for me is like, probably over like ad nauseum, me owning my shit. And so anytime conversations come up with my kids, I make it very abundantly clear that, look, I loved you, but I wasn't in a space of being loved. Like, I didn't want to have kids. I'm honest about that, which also can't always feel good, but I try to be like, but I do now. Like, I want you now. I'm glad I have you. But I think being honest is like the first step. Being honest with yourself. I was too young to have a kid. Society says that, I had to have the kid. Society got to make that determination. My parents got to make that decision. I was too young to have a kid. No 16-year-old should have a kid. Like, we need to start having that conversation first and foremost. I wasn't prepared to parent. I had my kid and my parents went back to work and I stayed at home with a baby. I was 16 years old. I can barely take care of myself.
Right.
So, like, I feel like there was like a certain sense of being set up for failure. But I tell him that. I want him to know that, because I also didn't want them to go and impregnate people, and have kids at 16 themselves.
Which happens a lot with, like, repeated patterns.
Exactly. My mom was a teenage kid. My grandmother was a teenage mom. And so thankfully I had broken that pattern. But I was honest about it because I wanted them to know, like, first of all, I wanted them to try to have some sort of compassion and empathy for my experience. Not that I need them to say sorry to me about anything, that's not it. But if they understood how much suffering I was going through at that time, then hopefully they would make better decisions, right? But I also wanted them to see that, like, because I was in that space, I didn't have the space of emotional regulation. And that I learned that. I tell my son that him and I, like, we have a bond that is, like, crazy, because it was me and him for the longest time. And he taught me how to love. Like, he taught me how to love. And so I'm honest about any of the, screaming matches and emotional dysregulation that I had. I'm honest about how I see it show up in their bodies. I'm honest in how I see it show up in their relationships with their spouses. Specifically, my older two is what I'm talking about. I'm honest about how, like, I see my impact in them. So that when they go to their therapist and they're like, I don't understand where this is coming from, they can be honest with the therapist and be like, my mom did this
what
to
happened.
me. Because one of the things that was interesting when my middle kiddo started going to therapy is when they would go to therapy, they didn't want to be honest with the therapist because they felt like it would hurt my feelings.
I see. Yeah.
And I was
But like, I mean, that's interesting that they had that feeling, even though it's not like the therapist is telling you what's going on.
But they felt like a certain sense of
a loyalty.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, absolutely not. Absolutely not. You get to go and you get to be honest about it 100% your experience. But I'm also not willing to take responsibility for things that didn't happen. So, for example, with my middle kiddo, they think that they had, like, certain situations that came up, and I'm like, I will honor their experience. Like, I'm sorry that that's how that came off for you. But what I witnessed at that point in life was this. Right. And so like because I don't want to take away their experience.
Yeah.
Because our experiences are
your own.
and they're felt.
And
right?
to validate them is super important.
Yeah.
Because when I had
Exactly.
my like implosion, like they weren't validated at all. And that just really hurts.
It's like then it's almost like another layer of abuse. Like you're not being truthful. Right. You're not being honest.
Yeah.
Well, no, this is how
this is how it went through for me. Yeah.
And so then I can hold space for the fact that was your experience. However, I just want you to know what our experience, mine and my husband's experience at this time, was like over here. Mm-hmm. So that they could possibly have an idea that there might be two different realities, because all of us are just living from our own conditioning and our own perspectives, right? Yeah. And so that conditioning shades everything that we see. So if my kid had decided that they were unloved, even though we had started working through that, some of that stuff, if they had decided that they're unloved, then their whole perception is living this life of being unloved. And so, also giving them I get where it came from. Yeah. Like it 100% probably came from me. And I just also want to hold the space that wasn't the case the whole time. Mm-hmm. And, some of the perceptions that you have when you were a little bit older is not what I saw.
So like I would say the takeaway here then is like honesty, transparency, authenticity,
and the self-autonomy. And this part is the important part. I don't get to decide if they forgive me. I don't get to decide if they want to have the relationships with me. Yeah. I don't get to decide that they go and get therapy and they heal. I don't get to decide any of that. Yeah. They do. And so since my kids are all grown now, there is a pullback of like, I am here and vulnerable and willing to own my shit, and I 100% will own it every single time I can. And I have no qualms in doing that, but I'm not going to own yours. And now I am also not going to be the victim of you not doing your work to heal too. Right.
You're not going to blame me. Well,
you can blame me for all the things I did.
But that's on you.
Yeah,
you're blaming me. Is you're going to find out in the end that when you start blaming, what's the saying? You got.
The four fingers pointing back. Yeah. You can blame me as much as you want to, but the responsibility is still on you now to heal.
To heal, yes.
And the bullshit of that is why I've chosen to heal my relationship with my mother.
Why you've chosen to or chosen not to?
Chosen to. And as much as it will be, that my mother is my mother and I'm myself, and there's that relationship there. But that's it, right? I get to choose now what the relationship is going to be. And I blame my mom. I do blame my mom for a lot of things, but I also hold space for the fact that my mom was doing the best that my mom could do in the moment. Right. And my mom's not going to own her shit. I'm only going to own mine. Yeah. I'm not going to own my mom's, and I'm not going to own my kids' shit that comes from this, right? So, giving them that self-autonomy too. Like, here's all the ways that I fucked up. Go heal. And if you choose not to heal,
that's your choice. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The ability, the resources, and even my support is there for you.
I will come to you there.
I'm going to be working on me.
Right.
If you'd like to heal with me, come along with the ride. Yeah. Hop on my ship. Yeah. But if you don't, it's okay.
Exactly. And it's
still
okay. Perfect. It's still perfect.
We don't have to. We don't, just because we're family blood doesn't mean we have to be on the same ship.
And we can still have the truth of the situation, which is you have decided not to have the relationship with me, and I am still allowed to have the emotional, heartbreak from that.
Sure, absolutely.
Right? Like all of it gets to be perfect, and that's the thing. All of it gets to be perfect. I can be heartbroken if my children decide not to have a relationship with me, but I'm also always going to work on my self-autonomy. And in working on that, I still have to hold the space for theirs. Because if I'm asking them to have a relationship to appease me, then that's asking them to be out of their self-autonomy.
Right. Which, this is a lot. All of this requires a shit ton of emotional maturity. Really. Just if you're the one making this choice and making these proclamations, it's going to take a lot of maturity because there might be some really explosive moments.
Well, you said it earlier. It's okay. We all know smoking cigarettes is not good for you.
Right.
Yet we still sell them, they still buy them.
People still smoke them.
For people like me who used to smoke, there is an occasional urge for that same thing.
Sure.
Oh, I can't deny that.
Sure.
I don't choose it, but there is. And it was a long time before I quit that I knew you read it on the package.
Yeah.
But you still smoke.
Right.
Knowing that you need to have a relationship and healing and doing something about it is totally.
Knowing and doing are two very
and
different
doing
things.
are-
So
and even knowing and even wanting, because you know how hard that work
that's
is.
what I'm saying. It does take a lot of discipline. It takes a lot of permission for yourself, like you said, to have all these feelings,
It's
all
scary.
this.
You don't know if they're gonna.
Yeah, you don't know how they're going to respond, but it
And
takes a lot of maturity.
We have taught little people, right? We teach them to apologize out of shame.
Yeah.
Right.
Right? We teach them that there's something wrong with them. You did something messed up. You did something bad. Now go apologize. And so what we teach young people is, in order for me to apologize, that means that I'm less than, that I am not good. And that's why I have to say sorry. So then you get us as adults, right? Like my mom, who refuses to apologize and own their shit, because we have been taught since we were little that it means that we're not nice or we're bad or we're not worthy,
Or
right?
you're on the other end of the coin, like I am. You just say you're sorry. You destroyed this whole place because of whatever you did.
just said you're sorry to get out.
I said I'm sorry. It should be
So I
fixed.
can get out.
Yeah.
You all should be right
To get out of it,
because
right?
all I had to do was
Right.
say I'm sorry.
Right.
What the
Yeah.
hell's wrong with
Right.
you guys?
Yeah.
So sorry. So like even just own, like even having apologies are not authentic.
No.
We
Yeah,
teach
right.
them to not be authentic.
Yeah.
And so as an adult, like owning your shit comes with a lot of apologizing, right? But it has to be an apology of, I am going to take ownership and I am going to admit that ownership and I'm going to be vulnerable and honest about that ownership, and I don't get to decide what you do with that.
Right. I want to take a quick break because I got to go to the bathroom real fast, and then we'll pick up because I want to ask a few more questions about this.
Just go with the flow.
Just go with the flow. Okay, so stay tuned. To be continued. We hope that you're enjoying this, and if you are, don't forget to like and hit subscribe so you don't miss out on any episodes. So until we meet again, be evolving, people.